Hello, Socrates at Saddlebrook. Well, it finally happened and I'm not surprised. As I said in my last video cast, I was warned by the Institute about my lack of loyal devotion to Darwin. Well, remember when I was talking about intelligent design in the previous forums? That was enough, as you remember, to push me off campus and to do my talks after hours, which was perfectly okay with me. I mean, I understand. But when the question came up about the validity of Darwin's theory in light of scientific evidences, and I started lecturing on that, that pushed the issue over the top. But I couldn't live by myself if I didn't share what I was deducing from the evidence, and now I've paid the price. Like so many others who have had the temerity to talk truth instead of political correctness, one will have to be willing to pay the social and financial consequences. I thought I was being fair, and I encouraged the audience to challenge what I was saying, and I even gave them the opportunity to be making opposing arguments. What usually happened, however, is when they raised great objections, it stimulated great discussion and great conversation. I mean, that's what I was really after to begin with, reasoned dialogue with evidence put on the table and discussion with dignity and respect and no ad hominem attacks. I was thrilled. My lab, however, like so many, is highly influenced by peer pressure and politics. It gets a lot of government funding. It gets must toe the line to proclaim the standard dogma. I mean, here's just one example of that dogma. It's well-known quote by Richard Dawkins, one of the chief apostles of Darwinism and of the new atheism. Today, he says, the theory of evolution is about as much open to doubt as the theory that the earth goes around the sun. Really? I mean, that's hard to believe. This kind of dogma just keeps on getting repeated with such religious zeal when the evidence that statement is wrong is so ubiquitous. Even the Royal Society is starting to acknowledge that Darwinism needs overhaul on a large-scale basis. The Royal Society of London is perhaps the most prestigious scientific society in the world. In fact, Darwin was elected to it in 1839, 20 years before he published The Origin of the Species. But at a 2016 conference, even members rigorously debated this need for the overhaul, even ended up encouraging development of new evolutionary theories. You would never know this internal dissent and discussion took place by reading the mainstream scientific journals, nor from the mainstream media or from the TV documentaries. Now, unfortunately, these new theories will be restricted to those same materialistic presuppositions that we've talked about in the past, but its progress is greatly in the right direction. It will still mean that no design arguments are allowed, and allowed being the key word here. That means that ideologically based materialism will still reign. Now, Darwinian theory is also in trouble among the top independently minded professional biologists. But until new comfortable materialistic theories come along, the Darwinian dogma just gets louder, more hostile. The old dogma proclaimed with even more bluster. Unfortunately, the real issue, its materialistic presupposition, is never in question. Now, I understand my institution's motivation and my supervisor's action. The peer pressure, the financial pressure, the political ramifications for challenging the received view are enormous. I mean, even if one needs to procure the next round of government funding, you better be towing the line. And when you've been raised and educated in that kind of environment and drawing a paycheck from it, well, so I am delighted to be independent again. I have plenty of consulting opportunities and will be free to speak of whatever I believe to be true. But I will keep an open mind to these new theories as well. What I've been trying to say is that I've been let go, and I must retire my lab coat. Now, in its place, I'm wearing this great new shirt that reminds me of Darwin's ship to man theory and where evolution is going on to the next stage of the greater Superman. Isn't this cool? One of my evolutionary biologist friends gave it to me in celebration of my departure. I'm not sure of his motivation, but I appreciate the thought. Transform and transcend. Join me now at the beautiful Mountain View Country Club in Saddlebrook, Arizona for part 3 of the series on the origin of the species. Human evolution, where did I come from? I had this where did I come from up, and Dave walked in and said, well, I don't know about you, but I just came from home. Well, we're going to discuss But you can see I have all my props here. My Socrates thinker here is pondering his past. He has his genetic code done, and he found his ancient great-grandfather here. So we're fossil record and the DNA record. I hope you all have a bookmark. This is kind of a neat thing. You can just pick one up. And this is what Socrates is all about, thinking deeply about stuff that we don't normally stop to think about. And especially when we get to be our age and so forth, we start pondering these questions. Many of you know my testimony where this haunted me in my 30s, and I finally had to come to some decisions in my 30s. And it's been a wonderful trek for the last 40 years to go through and really ponder these. But on the back of it, it says, where did I come from? That's what we're going to discuss today. Where am I going? Has a nice little QR code here so you get in the website without having to fiddle with the keyboard. And this is our memento from Socrates at Saddlebrook. Back in 1831, a young man, a young scientist, a naturalist by the name of Charles Darwin, who had done some study in theology, he did study in medicine, and he was a naturalist. He loved beetles and worms, and he was about as good a naturalist as you could possibly get. And his dad paid for a 5-year, all expense paid tour of the Galapagos Islands in southern South America, and he pondered these questions. Where did I come from? Where am I going? Especially since he had some theology training. And in those days, there was very little question about that from a Western civilization point of view, because there was a worldview that said, I know where I came from. God created me. I'm a special creation. And that bothered him. He thought there had to be a natural explanation for this. And so he did study on the Galapagos Islands, and he studied for the next 25 years and he came to the conclusion that he put into his publication of The Origin of the Species in 1859. And this really sets the worldview that he had at the time, and what changed Western civilization. For the last 160 years, it's changed Western civilization. He said, I can entertain no doubt, after the most deliberate study and dispassionate judgment of which I am capable, that the view which most naturalists entertain, and which I formally entertain, namely that each species has been independently created, is erroneous. And then he offered a position called evolution, Darwinian evolution, which we're going to go through today so you understand what that is. And it pointed in the opposite direction of the creation hypothesis. Let's call it that. Let's call both of them hypothesis at this time, because in Socrates, what we do, we try to look at the data, analyze the data for ourselves, say, Stu says, but I say, type of thing. And you even get an opportunity in the after the break and so forth to tell me what your worldview is. I'll give you the floor for up to 30 seconds anyway, let's put it that way. Can't make too much of a speech, but you can certainly voice your view of this kind of thing. And then naturally there's people that want to put both of them together, that God works through evolution. So we have God doing it, we have nature doing it. What is it? Today, this is what the majority of, if you want to get a job in biology, this is what you have to believe, and that's fine if you want to believe that. Today, the theory of evolution is about as much open to doubt as the theory that the earth goes around the sun. Now, is there anybody here that doesn't believe the earth goes around the sun? I didn't think so. But at one time they did, right? I mean, they had the opposite worldview 400 years ago. Science changes. I mean, science is analyzing what the data is, what the reality is, and so forth, putting together a hypothesis, putting together a theory, collecting data, which is evidence, then making a decision. Sometimes that decision is pretty hard because the data is pretty hard and the analysis is right, the modeling is right, and so forth. And you hold on to that. Sometimes it's loosey-goosey. Here's a loosey-goosey skeptic. I love this reading James Lafadden because he's an internationally acclaimed science journalist, and he doesn't really take positions necessarily based on worldview. He does it on his own. I guess he does. All of us take positions on our worldview, right? But he wrote this fascinating book called Why Us? And he said, as a skeptic, he said, Darwin pulled off the greatest intellectual coup in science, fashioning an all-encompassing theory of gradualistic evolution to resolve the mystery of mysteries, which is why us, in defiance of all theoretical considerations and empirical evidence that would contradict it. So, let's look at evidence today and decide for yourself which way you think the evidence points. This is our quest for today. We're going to, what does the evidence show? What direction does it point? Let's follow the trail together. Now, if you were here for the very first one, this is session 3. The first session, we just opened up and said, there's 4 basic worldviews that grab us in one of the 4 directions and put us together. We all individually have a worldview. What's a worldview? Right here. Yeah. What do we look at? When we look at data, when we look at anything, when we look at reality, the glasses that we put on point us in a certain direction. We have a lens that tells us God did it. We don't even ponder that any farther. If you're a creationist, if you're an evolutionist, you say evolution did it. You don't have any issue with that. Theistic evolution, you say, well, yes, God did it, but there's scientific theory, and God did it through evolution. And then intelligent design, which we're going to talk about in September, says that brings back the whole Greek thought that there is design and purpose in the universe, but can that be scientifically detected? Can design and purpose be scientifically detected? That's going to give us another view, but today it's talking about creation, evolution, or putting them together, mixing them together. These are the big questions. That's what we like. We like taking the big questions. Are we 99% chimpanzee? Some geneticists say yes. I mean, I'm going to show you evidence, genetic evidence that shows we're 99% chimpanzee. I'm also 50% banana, but that's what my wife says anyway. Did we evolve from a chimpanzee-like creature? Common ancestor? Are our evolutionary ancestors hominids and Neanderthals? What the heck are those things? Well, these are creatures that existed way back when. We find evidence of it. We find skulls and fragments of bones and so forth. What are these creatures? Are they animals? Are they apes? Chimps? Are they humans? Are they subhumans? Are there other creatures that went extinct and we don't see today? Is there any hard dividing line between a human and an animal? Ponder that one. Say, what does that mean? Chimps do things, and we do things, and we have arms, and so forth. Is there any hard dividing line we can get at? Then we're going to have some fun with the infinite monkey theorems, and I'll save that for the fun time. How much does it take to change a chimp into a man from molecular evidence? Now, think about this. We know what the molecules are that make up a monkey, a chimp. We know what the molecules are pretty much that make up a man. We know what the genetic codes are of both of them. We have mathematical formulas that sit in between called population genetics. So theoretically, you'd be able to say, all right, imagine this is built out of Legos, that's built out of Legos.
What does it take to take one block at a time and move it over here? Well, it takes the mechanism of Darwinian evolution, which is random mutation, natural selection. We've talked about that in the past. And we should be able to say, how long does it take then to take this figure and convert it into that figure? We're actually going to go through that. Could our first parents be Adam and Eve? Nah, that's a story, it's a fairy tale. Well, people actually believe that, and creationists believe that still to today. Could there have been a single parent that gave us all our genetic background? And what is the genetic differences between the races? That's especially important today when we talk about the races and so forth. What are the genetic differences? So this is going to exhaust you and me to go through all this. Like last time, what we did, I introduced Yvonne. I'm going to introduce Yvonne again. Last time I went through 5 subjects that should be 5 separate talks and 5 separate discussions, but I did them all at one time, but it's on video. So the good thing is you can go back and do it at your own pace if any one of these areas really interest you. So I'm going to go through 5 of them today too, rapid succession. This is like a 10,000 foot view of these subjects. And you're not going to be totally satisfied with what you're hearing, but it's going to introduce you to them and hopefully generate some questions, answers, reading, study, discussion. So when you see the Yvonne figure, we're going to go and then get ready for another deep dive, okay? But in the spirit of full disclosure, let me say this, what we're looking at, because as a science type of guy, I want to go on evidence. And the evidence in this area is a little more fragmented than it about the Earth going around the sun, okay? In fact, it's so fragmented, so controversial, and so open to so many interpretations that there should be rigorous debate on this subject. Worldview is a major determinant on how we look at data. None of us are biased, we don't. Well, this isn't even a matter of being biased. Bias means that you're not going to be open-minded to new data. No, we're going to be open-minded and so forth, but we have a certain lens that we see things through, and that determines a lot of what we're looking at. Now, my worldview has probably been pretty evident. You can probably piece it together. I don't come out and say this is how you should think, but you know how I present data and so forth, so I'm going to appear to have a particular point of view. That's fine. So should you. You should have a particular point of view too. But I'm going to be open to opposing conclusions, and we'll give you the floor to do that. And then consider your own worldview. Think about it sometime. How does that shape what you view, how you view the data, and what your conclusions are? But I think the biggest lesson for all of us is to remain open and remain humble. And that goes for me. Let's remain open, let's remain humble about this, because things change. And the good thing about science is science should change with it. Sometimes it takes a long time, all right? Because things get fixed into an institution, they get political and so forth. But eventually the data wins out, which is really cool. So we met Yvonne. We're going to dig in for our first deep dive. First deep dive says, the genetic evidence shows we're 99% chimpanzee. So Socrates asks, he's always asking, what does that mean? First thing he says, what do you mean by that? That should be the question a lot of times when people say X. Well, what do you mean by X? Well, here's what we mean. Now if you go back to the video cast, we did Origin of Life series, and video cast 4 in our series talked about how DNA is made up. And if you remember our friend here, DNA, thank you again, Gene, for assembling this. It required an engineer to put this thing together for me, which the instructions said, this only just takes 10 minutes. But how many hours was it? You don't talk about it. But this is the molecule, the amazing molecule back in the 50s that was decoded by, at least the structure of it was decoded by Watson and Crick. And what they found out is these colored pairs of chemicals inside are actually a code. It's actually a language. The DNA has a language. I mean, can you imagine? Well, we have a language. I mean, we have an English language. It consists of 26 characters. We can do anything from writing Hamlet to doing mathematical formulas with it, to expounding the theory of relativity. We can do the Apostles' Creed in those characters, because we have individual characters that can be put together in a coded way. Well, the computer has a code. Two letters, 0 and 1. That's all it has. All this stuff that in our amazing computers, you look inside the language, you get down to it, 0 and 1. Everything, all the information in the world, in the universe, is coded in zeros and ones if it's inside a binary digital computer. Well, the genetic information that's written across the spine of the DNA there is 4 characters long. A, T, C, G. It just represents 4 chemicals. And you can imagine you can make instruction manual out of those 4 characters. And amazing thing in DNA, it does that. There's a 3 billion character. If you took the DNA out, my DNA, out of one cell, now I have 100 trillion cells. Gail has 101 trillion. Her DNA, the DNA, string it out there, and there's imagine little beads on this string. Those are the genes. And those genes contain the instructions for our characteristics that build our body. And those genetic instructions are written across that DNA string. And the amazing thing we found, there's a genetic code in there that translates from that DNA, it translates it into a set of what's called amino acids that build protein. And those proteins build us, plus a few other things that are going on, but this is a very simplified way of thinking about it. So the central dogma of molecular biology since the mid-20th century has been the central dogma: DNA makes RNA. RNA are this green string here. It's kind of another code that makes proteins that makes us. Here's how the chimp DNA sequence compares to us. So look at this first line: human DNA sequence, GAC, CT, AT, that code. Imagine that out for 3 billion characters. Now you see it pairs with a complementary string on the bottom. That's how we divide. That's how we were made. We start off as one cell divided into 2 cells. How does those cells divide into 2? Those sides develop. Those sides up to 100 trillion. Amazing. And each character, each cell has that same instruction in it. It's like the general has given the command for life to every one of his cells, so they each know individually what to do. So if one fails, another one takes over. It's a good thing too, because my body disappears every 7 years, right? If it wasn't rebuilt, I wouldn't be here. So I think I'm a little bit more than my body, but anyway, that's my worldview. The chimp DNA sequence, look at it, identical. All right, we must be identical to a chimp. Well, not quite. Really, the 99% is almost irrelevant. But let's say what the claim is here, that human evolution is a fact based on this similarity. Why? Because the central dogma of biology has been determined to be a fact. The genes matter, but the genes are only 2% of this long chain that I told you about. Gene here, gene here, gene here, space in between. 98% of the stuff is in between. Well, that was considered junk by the evolutionary theory. Why junk? Because we didn't know how it affected the coding of our genes. So the central dogma maintained its fact, was in fact true. And then there was only 1% genetic difference between the two. So that's how this theory got became in all the textbooks and so forth. But by 2015, the evidence showed otherwise. The central dogma now has been contradicted. Well, how has it been contradicted? Well, this 98% in between is not junk. It actually does something. It modifies the DNA. It modifies the RNA that changes the function. So it's not a simple formula that you have a DNA code here and a protein over here that builds us. No, this protein is modified along the way, spliced, put together. The functions that we have found are on, off, later, modify first, just like any kind of regulatory system. If you're an engineer, you know you build in regulatory systems to make things happen. So how the gene is expressed is what they call it. In other words, how the gene goes from the DNA coding to how it's expressed in the protein and then eventually in the human body is really what's going on. It opened up a whole new field of research now called epigenetics. So it's not longer just genetics, it's epigenetics. What's epigenetics? Well, epi is just a Greek word for beyond or above. There's something else going on beyond the genetics, and it's a revolution. This chart shows the publications up to 2018 on epigenetics. Back in 2000, hardly anything, just the theory, and so now we know all this function going on. The ENCODE project, 450 scientific organizations around the world coming up with function and understanding what's going on inside the 98% alleged junk. Now we're up to 5,000 public. This is the new era. It says how biology is rewriting our understanding of genetics, disease, and inheritance. So, Science Magazine, which is our flagship publication of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, started admitting what really is going on here, and they called it the myth of the 1% difference. The 99% makes no difference. It's the regulatory, it's what happens on the epigenetics of the 98%, how the genes are expressed. So the regulatory process in the chimp and the man are not the same. I mean, if it was 100% the same, the genetic difference wouldn't make any sense if the regulatory processes are different. And especially, you can imagine, in the brain cells. So the central dogma has been contradicted. The central dogma is really overseen and overshadowed now by these two lightning bolts that are coming in, and lightning bolts from all over epigenetic processes that are modifying things before these things make us. Well, what does make us then? What is the coding that goes inside? We know there has to be some kind of coding. If I said I shed my body every 7 years, something is continually making me. What is the information that's making me? It's not the physical process that really is the hard part to understand. It's the information process that directs the physical process inside. And it goes back to the fertilized egg. Right from the very, very beginning, when that sperm meets the ovum, bingo, that fertilized egg has all the information you'll ever need to build the embryo for the 9 months of development. And then from us, all the way to the end of our life. The genes make up 2% of the DNA. And I was thinking, how could I make an analogy out of this that people would understand? And I thought of the Apple iOS operating system. We all have a handheld device here. It has apps on it, right? And that has an operating system in it. The genetic dogma is only one of the apps. All the other apps that are in there are doing other functions, and we're just starting to learn what these functions are. Just starting to learn. We think we know that 60% of the DNA now it has function, and people are thinking, if 60, why isn't it 70, 80%? We just have to keep on finding this. We know where to look now. So what our fertilized egg is kind of like an operating system. It's like a computer operating system. It manages all the other apps, which I call it HOS instead of iOS. iOS 16 is coming out pretty soon. I want to get one of those in September or whatever. I don't know why, but because somebody said spend your money on it, I guess. But I call this the human HOS, and it's 99. It's so far above our understanding at this point in time, we don't know. But we're going to keep on discovering, right? But the operating system. So we are specified right from the moment of conception. Okay. sure you have questions. I'm sure we could have discussed this, but we have 4 more to go, so I want to keep you awake. Deep dive number 2. Here we go. Thank you, Yvonne. Okay, here we go. The fossil record shows we evolved from a chimp-like creature. Socrates says, all right, show me. Is that true? Well, Darwin in 1859 kind of set out on that track, but he didn't say much about human beings. He just said there was no fundamental difference between man and the higher animals. It was kind of a lightning bolt, but he didn't go into detail. 1871, he went into detail on this. And he said, man bears in his bodily structure clear traces of his descent from some lower form. Man is the descendant of the apes and the monkeys and a product of natural selection. So you might recall from the last time we said his theory was random mutation, natural selection. He said that was the mechanism. And he said, that's true, he's convinced of it and so forth, and we're going to apply it now to mankind and find out that we came from descendants of apes and monkeys. And this is what's taught, this is what's believed in the halls of the of science today. And Richard Dawkins is a popularizer of this view, confirms it, that we are close cousins to monkeys and apes. We too are animals. Okay? 6 million years of evolution. So we look and dig in the fossils and so forth, and we find pieces. We don't find anything like this, especially if not plastic. I mean, they are built of bone and so forth, but what do we find? We find a little piece here, a little piece there, a crack. These things are smashed to pieces. I mean, elephants, mastodons, dinosaurs, no, not dinosaurs, but stepped on it and crushed these pieces. But anyway, here's the classic icon of evolution that we say, right? Chimps, hominids, trying to say that there's a theory, a mechanism that takes us all the way from the chimps to the humans. Now, I can draw pictures too. I mean, pictures by themselves don't mean anything. What we need is the mechanism, right? That evolves one to the next. Let's look at that. Let's just look at the raw data first. And the media is wonderful in how it portrays the press hype on this is over the top, even to the most ardent evolutionists. It's like, hold their eyes, you know, don't they what the public is hearing? But there's the world's oldest human-linked skeleton found, already 4 million years ago, and this will be on the newscast and so forth. There'll be a documentary on Nova, there'll be on the Discovery Channel and so forth. Chimp-like creature appears in the fossil record. But here's what happens. He already appears in the fossil record, but there's no evolutionary history to him, so that's fine. But Artie gets reconstructed. He has pieces, bones crushed and so forth. It took 15 years to put Artie together. And thinking, well, does this piece go there? Is that piece is that really a piece of Artie, or is that a piece of something else? There has been not an evolutionary pathway established from Artie to humans. Well, maybe from somebody closer to humans today, 1 million years ago. Lucy, you might have heard of Lucy. Lucy even toured the United States. And she's the Australopithecines, or southern ape. This is mostly Africa. Well, she was well adapted. She's bipedal. That's one of the big differentiations that the scientists look for. Are they? Big deal. That is a big deal when you think about it. I mean, if you're using your hands to do that, you're not using them to do this. She was well adapted for walking but also climbing. She got reconstructed. Her bones were found scattered over a hillside. That's fine. And she appears also in the fossil record abruptly. She doesn't have a link to Artie, though. I mean, there's another just isolated case of evolutionary character with no evolutionary history. And she didn't provide an evolutionary pathway to humans either. Now, you'll see plenty of those diagrams that show it, but when you really look at the literature and so forth, you don't see how it works. Okay? All right, well, let's get a little bit closer, something closer to humans. Now you find bones, is that an ape? Is that a human? Or is that something else? Well, it could be something else. We'll call it a hominid. You've heard Homo sapien, Homo erectus, all these Homo type of features. Are they the same species? Are they ape-like? Are they human-like? Are they transitional? Well, if I look at it from this angle, well, maybe I'll look at it from this angle. Maybe I'll have some artists reconstruct some diagrams for me. Missing links are still missing. So naturalism, which as we know is a philosophy, that only nature can be involved in this process. There's no fossil trail to document how this process works. We can draw the diagrams, but there's very little. This is what we actually see. This is what we actually find. We don't find whole things. We find a series of bones. In fact, National Geographic, which is heavily pro-evolution, by the way, admitted this in 2015. They said alleged human ancestor fossils are so rare that you could put them into a small shoebox. So we have a lot of hypothesizing going on, a lot of reconstruction and so forth going on. How would you put together those bones, for example? Unfortunately, the public is rarely accurately informed of these deep-seated problems. You see the discoveries, you don't see the problems with all the different views of the evolutionary connection. You don't see the fights that go on inside the organizations over this. In fact, the Discovery Channel reported go out and interview 150 scientists that are specialists in this area about the Neanderthals. They came back with literally 150 different stories, and each of the persons would say, "Oh, that last guy you talked to, he's a Neanderthal." We don't get a whole lot of agreement, let's put it that way, on this, on the inside. So to really get the story, you have to read the inside of what's going on. And the media portrays this, that all they want is the headlines, right? Well, here, I have to give National Geographic a lot of credit, because they said, you know, what we need is more artists in our cadre of artists here. So they selected, they almost put out for bid. First four artists will give you the bones, you reconstruct what this female hominid looked like. And this is what they got back. Now, one of them looks like a modern day human. Fairly good looking Negro woman there. One of them looks like a chimp climbing the tree. One of them looks like something in between. We'll call that hominid, but we don't know what that is. The point being, you can put these together in almost any way you want. This is not like one puzzle that you can put together. I got the magazine back in 2000. I was able to order this through eBay. If you want to actually see the spread in here, it's up here at the table. Who are the Neanderthals? Well, these are actual creatures with a human-like body plan. They appear on the scene, let's say 100,000 years ago. They go extinct around 30,000 years ago. There's no indication. We look for cultural and social behavior of these animals, creatures too. Whereas when you find human-level intelligence, you find artwork, you find intelligent behavior. There's no sign of real human-like intelligence with the hominids. Sure, there's some crude tool making, bash the heck out of this to get that last meat. Well, animals do that today too. They share high similarities with humans. And the neat thing about genetics now is in 2010, they actually sequenced the DNA of a Neanderthal. So we have the actual genetic string, like we do for a chimpanzee, for the human and so forth, and we can start comparing them. But the interesting thing is, where's Georgia? There she is. Did you say you were 5% Neanderthal?
No, my husband was.
Her husband is.
We won't tell them that you said that.
Well, there is a Neanderthal sequence, and you might be determined to find out that you're 2% Neanderthal. What does that mean? Well, I mean, it could mean a couple things. We don't want to think about interbreeding between humans and animals, but we know what goes on in the rest of the world. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is crazy. It's a possibility, but they certainly died out. You know, I mean, we have crosses between tigers and lions, right? there are creatures that can be fertile for a while, but they died out. So whatever this is, died out 30,000 years ago. So did they interbreed? Or it could have been originally built in, that percentage could have been originally built into your husband's gene pool. I mean, think about that. I don't think he's a constant. That's even better thought, isn't it? Modern humans, all right, I'm not going to get into huge discussions of how far this goes back. We don't see language until 3000 BC, 4000 BC. We don't see real heavy-duty artwork like statues and sculpting and so forth to 20,000 BC, something like that. But anyway, the evidence says it goes back 35,000 years. But these artifacts demonstrate superior intelligence, and they appear. The human appears suddenly in the record again, without any evolutionary history. It's not like we have a model and said, and now it's time for a human. But what differentiates the human from all other animals? And I love the research in this area to find out that there's one thing: symbols. If you want to have a hard line between animals and humans, it's symbols, symbolic representation. Just like I went through the 26 characters and the 4 characters, that's symbol manipulation. Language, speech, artifacts. It's huge. In 2014, I read a write-up on this paper that came out. Anybody familiar with Noam Chomsky? That name ring a bell? Oh, good. Yeah, world authority on linguistics. He was part of the team. These were 8 of the top scientists in almost every scientific discipline you can imagine: linguistics, evolutionary biology, paleoanthropology, genetics, go on. And they came to this conclusion themselves, and they wrote it, and they said, we have no explanation of how or why our linguistic, computational, and representation evolved. Non-human animals provide virtually no relevant parallels to human linguistic communication. Chomsky even went as far, and these, in a great majority, are either atheists or extreme agnostic people. Chomsky said this could have been hardwired into us from the very beginning. Symbolic representation. I mean, just look over the list. You could come up with your own list. It goes on for pages and pages. Consciousness, creativity, reasoning, orchestration, quest for discovery, ordering reality to have dominion over it. This is all the stuff that we do. We seek meaning, purpose, values. We formulate scientific methodologies. We use foresight, and we analyze our past and project our future. We formulate theories of space and time. We look out to the edge of the universe. We look into the depths of the cell. And then how about all the emotional things that we have? Love, truth, goodness, beauty. We're amazing. We're amazing creatures. And it's inexplicable search for origin and destiny, our search for God. Wow. Now, how does Darwin explain that? Well, he really doesn't, but this is about as good as he could do. There is no, quote, there is no fundamental difference between man and the higher animals in their mental faculties. I cannot doubt that language owes its origin to the imitation and voice of other animals. Birds tweet, I mean, crows grunt. Woman, come here. We see religious devotion in the deep love of a dog for his master. Quote, a dog looks upon its master as the God. So okay, he's entitled to his opinion. So the claim is, given enough time, though, Darwin's theories are going to be vindicated. It's sometimes likened to the infinite monkey theorem that we talked about in videocast 4 on the origin of life. When something's impossible, if you give it enough time and enough resources, it'll eventually happen. Right? It'll eventually happen. If you have infinite number of resources, infinite monkeys on a typewriter and so forth, eventually the monkeys are going to type out Hamlet. We talked about that. Well, can an infinite number of monkeys typing on an infinite number of computers eventually produce Hamlet? Somebody, enterprising students in Plymouth University, England, did an experiment. They took 6 primates, they put them in a cage with a computer, and watch what happens, see if what would happen. The lead researcher, Mike Phillips, said, well, they pressed a lot of S's, but English isn't their first language. They were interested in defecating and urinating on the keyboard. The lead male got a stone and started bashing the hell out of it, he said. Eventually, they did produce 5 pages of text, primarily of the letter S. So I found this picture, I just loved it. Especially the guy in the front here. He has one called McBeast, and he's about ready to change it, and his buddy's laughing at him. He didn't think that was a very good idea, so we have to have a little fun sometimes. Okay. Deep dive, number 3. Here we go. Well, how long would it take to change a monkey into a man? I mean, that's a scientific question. We know genetic makeup here, we know genetic makeup here, we know the process, the mechanism in between, we can do it block at a time, and so forth. Well, how long is that going to take? Now, this is called molecular biology on these 2 sides. In between, we have a mathematical formulation of evolution called population genetics. You don't have to worry about the names and so forth, but you get the idea of how this works. We go from ape to man. So we have the fossil data, that goes back 6 million years. We modify the genes from here to here by Darwin's mechanism, random mutation, natural selection. There's a few other things that are in there. We talked about other evolutionary paradigms and so forth that are coming along, but they all basically are in the same mechanism. How many mutations would it take? How much time would it take? We can calculate that. It's pretty cool. All right, so we start with the central dogma of biology, and I'm just going to look at the genetics only. I'm not looking at the epigenetics, which is this huge operating system, all the other stuff that's going on. So there's a small number of mutations in the DNA sequence that takes place, and they accumulate according to Darwinian theory. In this sequence, we just see one change there. We see an A, which grabs its T with it, and it's changed to a G and a C. Well, you accumulate that, and after a while, as you know from what we talked about before with Darwin's theory, that if it produces a species or a modification that is for survival, that always is a better way of surviving, of adapting to my environment, then eventually that mutation and set of mutations works its way into the population, and the population then becomes stable with that mutation, that genetic change fixed in it, and then it goes on to the next thing and so forth. So we start with one mutation. So now, to make one simple protein, remember our model, DNA makes RNA, makes protein, makes us. Protein, one simple molecule of all of us, just one simple molecule. And that requires, change one simple molecule requires a coordination of 8 coordinated mutations. All right, that sounds okay. There's another number in our formula, we can run all these numbers and so forth. But remember, evolution, I should say, is undirected. There's no forethought on it. There's any coordination that takes place between here and here is pretty much dumb luck. So it just takes longer time before things eventually they coordinate. So for one single mutation to become fixed in a population takes 6 million years. That's just one little aspect of it. Two coordinated mutations would take 216 million years. Well, we want to go back 6 million years where we see these creatures. 8 coordinated mutations, forget it. we're somewhere out there somewhere beyond all the time in the history of the entire universe. Imagine what it would take in this process for going for the chimp in the zoo and the typewriters there, no matter how many there are, to composing Hamlet and working in an office environment. I mean, tens of thousands of coordinate changes to modify a monkey from a tree dweller to a landwalker. Imagine from 5 pages of S at a zoo to producing Hamlet. I mean, Darwin's mechanism is contradicted here at the molecular level. Yet, and this is one of the reasons I'm doing this series, because this, I'll have to admit, offends my sensibilities, because I look at my textbooks. I see how the schools teach the kids. These testimonies are given before the state boards of education, every state, for the public school curriculum. This is the kind of testimony that you'll get. Human evolution has the most complete sequence of fossil succession of any mammal in the world. There are no gaps. There's no lack of transitional fossils. Huh? Now, the top scientists know this. I mean, I'm talking about social politics and so forth when I'm talking about school boards, right? But it's important as adults and parents and our kids and so forth to know why those things were in the textbooks. Top scientists know the difference. Science, our top magazine, said back in 1981, human evolution is like reconstructing the plot of War and Peace, about that thick, with 13 randomly selected pages. Nature, which is probably the most famous, I should say, science literature in the world, magazine in the world, for interdisciplinary science, a British publication. Henry Gee is their top science editor. Back in 1999, he said, to take a line of fossils and claim that they represent a lineage is not a scientific hypothesis that can be tested, but an assertion that carries the same validity as a bedtime story. Amusing, perhaps, even instructive, but not scientific. Number 4, and the clock is ticking. All right, science has proven that humanity could not have originated from a single pair. How do you know that? Well, there's 2 models for where humanity originated. One's called the out of Africa model, and the other's called the multi-regional model. The out of Africa model, and this is based on where we find the structures and fossils and so forth, and how many, and then find the migration patterns and the timing and so forth. The birthplace of humanity is somewhere in Africa, Mesopotamia area. Then that pathway goes into Europe, and then into Asia, and then across the Bering Strait, and then down through Canada and the West Coast, and so forth. That's the out of Africa model. Birthplace is somewhere there. The multi-regional model says, no, has to be at least 3 areas where the birthplace of humanity took place. Africa, Europe, Asia. All right, that makes. But here's the problem. These birthplaces have to be simultaneously coordinated. Now, as we've seen, it's hard enough to find one evolutionary model that works. To get 3 simultaneous at the exact same time to populate the world, that really is stretching credulity. These models now are based on a valid mathematical tool called population genetics, but this mathematical tool doesn't test whether or not Darwinism is true. It just assumes Darwinism is true. Okay. So that these mathematical models generate variations spread throughout the population. And the results indicate that the population size for modern humans had to be on the order of 10,000. Well, that's quite a bit more than two. 10,000 what? So 10,000 people had to have evolved to a particular place at that point in time for modern humans to have evolved. So it concludes, if all that is accurate, it concludes that there's way too much genetic diversity to come from a single pair. Makes sense? I mean, that's from that model and that assumption, that's a true statement. So let's evaluate the two models. Well, the multi-regional model requires these three simultaneous evolutionary beginnings. So you have to assume that. Human evolution is suspect for just one, so let alone three. So I find little credibility in the multi-regional. So the multi-regional model really has to give way, in my view, to the Adam and Eve. Let's call it the Adam and Eve model, out of Africa model. I'll call it. Adam and Eve is a biblical interpretation, but the out of Africa model. So the first pair originated somewhere in the Mesopotamia, Africa area. Humans appear suddenly in the fossil record with no apparent evolutionary connection, as we talked about. There is migration then from that area to around the world. So the Adam and Eve hypothesis is back on the table. Remember, Darwin set out to prove that the Adam and Eve hypothesis was wrong. So when I say it's back on the table, that's 160 years of research. Okay, last one. We're gonna do this. Deep dive number 5. Where did the different races come from? My honey's been asking me that one all the time. I mean, that's a very important question, isn't it? Darwin believed that there were favored races and races evolving. I'm sure that doesn't go well with a lot of people. It's not talked about very much. It certainly doesn't, in today's climate, it certainly doesn't go well. There were savage races that are evolving into the Caucasian race. Interesting, I saw some of the analysis that he was doing on brain size and so forth. And guess who had the biggest brain size? Was the Europeans, especially in Britain. The Americans were about 10% lower. The French were way down there. By the time Darwin did his Descent of Man 12 years later, he's pretty dominant on this. Civilized races will exterminate and replace throughout the world the savage races. If you want to read some fascinating stuff of his 5-year cruise to the South America, the natives of South America, the whole story, which I can't get into, but it's he was really convinced about this, that the savage races were still evolving, and still evolving. Here's what the evidence shows. Really thankful for genetic analysis here. The human races all share the same gene pool. It's just, genes are like discrete things, and they get shaken up between, the 23 of this, of the female and the female, and come together, shake it up, and whoosh, out comes Dick. Out comes Stu. I can't call it the luck of the draw, whatever you want to call it, providence, God's providence, selection, however you want to view that from your own particular worldview, but like a black couple could statistically have a white child. So white parents could have a black child. It's statistical distribution. Now, most of it, 99.9%, is always within the same bell-shaped curve. But all the human races share in the same gene pool. There's no genetic difference that way. So here comes the good part. You get to thinking, you're all awake. It's wonderful. Jeez. I guess it was that Yvonne's deep dive that did it for you, right? What are your conclusions on this? I mean, You see how I'm even interpreting the data. What are they? Creation? Evolution? Put them together? I'll share with you mine, because I don't want to keep anything hidden here. I think in this particular analysis I did that creation gets an uptick. That Darwin failed to make his case. He set out to show that special creation was invalid, that nature could do the job. And I think he failed. He did not refute it. All the races are from the same gene pool. They're not evolving. And Adam and Eve remain an open hypothesis. So I'll give creation an uptick on this. And I'll give evolution a downtick based on the evidence that I shared with you. The myth of the 1%. The central dogma being contradicted. And now there's much more to it with epigenetics. The common descent and natural mechanism that Darwin gave us has been contradicted. We talked more about that last week than we're going to talk about here. The population genetics model has been shown to be based on so many assumptions that could produce, doesn't have to be 10,000 original people, could have been 2. So human evolution, in my view of the data, has been contradicted. How about theistic evolution? This is a very popular theory among Christians in particular, who want evolution and Darwinism together. So I just asked the question, if evolution is refuted, how does God coexist with it? How does God coexist with a theory that's been contradicted? It undermines a literal. A lot of people don't have literal interpretations of the Bible. They have more liberal, poetic version of Genesis 1 through 11. But how does it undermine? A lot of people have a literalistic interpretation of the Bible. Logic. How does God direct an undirected process? I mean, evolution is undirected. Spin the dials. Undirected. And then when we open up for the new season, I'm going to come back and share with you something that's been developed. It's exciting to me in the last 25 years called intelligent design. Intelligent design doesn't answer these questions, but it brings back into the discussion, remember our Plato pointing up that there has to be a top-down way of looking at the data, and Aristotle pointing down and saying, well, there's a bottom-up. It has to be both ways. In my view anyway, very much of an intelligent design proponent. And I'm going to explain why in September and ask, will that help in this debate?
You know, Darwin set out to prove that the species were not, as he put it, independently created. Rather, he said, nature did it over long periods of time. But based on the scientific evidence you just saw, and particularly that of the last 50 years, Darwin failed to prove his contention. In fact, his whole scientific theory and the evidence now is failing. The theory is failing. Even his most ardent supporters are starting to call for its replacement. But don't take my word for it. I urge you to check this out for yourself. But beware, you're going to have to dig real deep for this, because the standard dogma still controls the literature and covers up the real story. Now, if you don't want to dig through the scientific literature, I commend you to a good journalistic source, The Guardian, Britain's most prized news source for dispassionate discussion of controversial issues. Their extended report in the June 28, 2022 issue is particularly informative. Do we need a new theory of evolution? But isn't this how science works? I mean, new information comes along, better insight comes along, new technology reveals more about nature, all produce new and better theories. There's no so-called settled science on this matter, despite all the claims, and despite all the invective that are hurled against Darwin's naysayers, including me. Darwin's theory is also particularly in trouble because it is conducted under a flawed philosophical premise that we've been discussing all along, that nature alone, by itself, materialism, can explain all of life's diversity. The Darwinists say that this apparent design of nature, which is obvious to everybody, is just an illusion, that there's no design to life, as was believed for millennia before Darwin, and even believed by the majority of the people today. It's so intuitively obvious. But we can't know ahead of time that there's no design in nature. That's not a scientific conclusion. That's just an assumption. Statements like that should be shown to be valid before they should be accepted. And his whole theory is based on that assumption. It's a philosophical assumption, an ideological presupposition that could well be wrong. Now, the great Greek thinkers, the philosophers who started Western philosophy, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all believed that design was real. And it's important to understand design. Design thinking was believed true in science all the way through history until Darwin proposed otherwise in the 1860s. In fact, the Greek philosophers said they weren't even able to fully understand anything until they had some kind of answer to the design question. Now, current science, since Darwin, asks only 2 of the 4 great questions that the Greeks asked. They asked what it's made of, how does it work, what's its design, what's its purpose. Current science only asks 2 of those 4 questions. Aristotle here is investigating the first 2 questions. What's it made of? How does it work? But Plato is insisting that the discussion also address design and purpose. The Greeks weren't satisfied until they had answers to all 4 of those questions. In the last 30 years, science now has been able to get a handle on this design question, whether it's apparent or is it's real. That's new and exciting information, and in the next Socrates forum, I will show you how this has been formulated. I will explain how life demonstrates design, and that by knowing design helps you understand what life is. So be sure to come to the next forum. Don't miss it. What is intelligent design? Can we know that life is designed? If you're anywhere near the Saddlebrook, Arizona area, please come join us for a live Socrates forum. But if you're not close by, then wait for the video cast. But now you must be registered on the website to get notifications of when and where this takes place. Remember, www.socrates@saddlebrook.club. So, until next time, I'm Stuart Orr, reminding you, keep thinking deeply. Examine the evidence for yourself and follow the path wherever it leads you. Bye for now.